welcome back to the 99. We are back here at Bernie headquarters, having just watched the first Democratic debate, second night.
Yes.
How are you guys feeling?
I am pumped. I love that. I feel great. Despite eating 3 slices of pizza in every commercial break, I'm feeling awesome.
Well, I think that part of what was really inspiring was that Bernie went out on such a strong note. I think he really identified one of the things that distinguishes him the most, and which we talked about at the top of the hour, which is that he understands that there are institutional barriers to getting a lot of things done. A couple of candidates said this, and I think that they're right. There were a lot of good ideas out on that stage tonight. But the question becomes, who is best poised, best equipped, both best politically oriented to actually make the kinds of fundamental changes that we need to have happen, and that haven't happened over the course of the last 30 or so years, despite the fact that a lot of these ideas have been percolating around for a while and frankly been brought up and kept in the public eye by Bernie Sanders himself.
His closing statement was like almost exactly that.
It was perfect.
Yeah, I mean, like, we keep on hearing about these things, but nothing seems to change. It's driving me nuts.
Yeah.
So that's your big takeaway?
That's my big takeaway. What's yours, Bill?
My big takeaway is I think what we saw tonight, especially the first half of this debate, we saw a preview of the general election. This is what it will look like when Bernie Sanders takes on Trump and defeats him. And beyond that, not only was he the only one who was, fearless in taking on Donald Trump, he's the only one who will go beyond that, because it's not just about defeating Donald Trump, as you were just saying. It's about defeating Donald Trump and having the movement and that consistent record to actually get that work done. Yeah. Like he was saying in his closing statement right there. It's so much more than that.
Yeah. How about you, Josh? Did you have a takeaway?
Yeah, well, 2 things. I want to build on what Bill just said. And I think what we saw tonight was the candidate who can best defeat Donald Trump in the general election. Donald Trump ran as a faux Bernie Sanders. To defeat Donald Trump, you need the real Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
And what we saw tonight was one person on that stage who offered a vision for America. It's one where healthcare is a right for everybody. You don't go bankrupt because you have to get life-saving medical care.
Yeah.
It's one where we have a criminal justice system that doesn't imprison people of color at rates far higher than whites. It's one where prescription drug prices are cut in half. It's where we take on climate change. And the difference is, Brianna, as you said, it's taking on and identifying the powerful special interests in this country.
Yeah.
Nobody else on that stage is talking about that. Bernie Sanders is.
Yeah, what I thought was kind of interesting was that a lot of these issues, as we mentioned before, were super controversial in 2016. And now tonight, there seemed to be some hesitancy from people to actually draw very grand distinctions between Bernie Sanders' agenda and the extent to which they've kind of appropriated large parts of it as their own, although those distinctions absolutely still do exist.
Well, you saw for the first, I think you're right. Like, the distinctions exist, but the whole debate is framed around Bernie Sanders' ideas.
Right. And you even got a couple of candidates giving him nods, I think perhaps unintentionally.
I mean, it was almost the whole first hour.
Yeah.
But so before we go any further, I just want to bring it back to everyone. Some folks just tuned in right now. We are doing a live stream across all these different platforms. It's the second time tonight we're on Twitch. Second time a presidential campaign's ever been on Twitch. But get in the comments. We want to know what you heard. We want to know what you think is most important. What was missed? Again, it took forever for climate change to come up, which is ridiculous. What do you think is the biggest thing out there? And I will say, you are what power the revolution. So get in there. If you're watching on Twitch, if you're watching on live.berniesanders.com, you can donate and power the revolution that we are all a part of.
Make a donation. I saw Deborah just made a $27 donation.
Hell yeah,
Darlene
Deborah
just made $3 donation.
Irene
made a $27 donation.
Okay,
Whatever
Irene.
you can.
Yeah.
Live.berniesanders.com. This campaign is powered by people like you. We need you to be a part of it.
Yes.
Please make a contribution, no matter how small.
So I want to start going through some highlights, and I want to start with healthcare, since that's where we started with this debate. And not necessarily because the moderators brought up healthcare, but because everyone seemed to rush to want to define themselves on this issue.
Yeah.
I think that what has become clear is that Bernie Sanders' championship of this issue over the past 3 years has really made it a high point in the public imagination of Americans, and every candidate understands that they have to be responsive to this if they want to get ahead. And it's something that we've seen as we've talked to people as we've traveled across the country.
Yeah.
Something I've noticed as I've covered this issue on our campaign podcast, Hear the Burn, that the thing that is uniting a lot of folks who are part of this movement here at Bernie HQ is the fact that healthcare is such a life and death crisis in this country.
Do you want to play? Should we cue up the clip and then come back and
I would
talk
love
about
that.
Yeah, let's do
that's
that.
perfect.
All right, this is Bernie Sanders in the debate tonight talking about Medicare for All.
Hard to believe that every other major country on earth, including my neighbor 50 miles north of me, Canada, somehow has figured out a way to provide health care to every man, woman, and child, and in most cases, they're spending 50% per capita what we are spending. Let's be clear. Let us be very clear. The function of health care today, from the insurance and drug company perspective, is not to provide quality care to all in a cost-effective way. The function of the healthcare system today is to make billions in profits for the insurance companies. And last year, if you could believe it, while we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, and I will lower prescription drug prices in half in this country, top 10 companies made $69 billion in profit. They will spend hundreds of millions of dollars lying to the American people, telling us why we cannot have a Medicare for all single-payer program.
I just have to follow up there. How do you implement it on a national level? How do you implement it on a national level, given the fact it's not succeeded and other states have tried?
I will tell you how we'll do it. We'll do it the way real change has always taken place, whether it was the labor movement, the civil rights movement, or the women's movement. We will have Medicare for all when tens of millions of people are prepared to stand up and tell the insurance companies and the drug companies that their day is gone, that health care is a human right, not something to make huge profits off of.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Williamson.
I'm going to get...
Okay, so I don't want that point to get lost. When he says it's a movement and makes a comparison to the civil rights movement, I think it's really important for us to remember that when we start to see real change after decades of advocacy, the civil rights movement didn't spring up in the summer of 1965. But what did happen that summer is that for the first time, television beamed the reality of the horrors that people were experiencing in everyday life straight to the eyes of millions of Americans. And I think that what's happened over the course of the movement building over the past few years is that the stories that come pouring in about people's healthcare crisis, the fact that healthcare is the #1 cause of bankruptcy in this country, the fact that people are rationing their insulin and dying because they can't afford a $45 vial, the fact that premiums are sky high, deductibles are insane, and that people can't afford to live. To find their basic medication. This is something that is increasingly difficult to ignore. And so even though there is this billion-dollar effort to try to suppress the movement for Medicare for all, I think that is in fact weakening, and we can't undersell the significance of Bernie Sanders in having that effect. Now, one of the questions that was a follow-up question was how do we implement it? How do we drill down? So I want to get into some of the details of that here and now.
Well, so I just want to. I'm looking at the Twitch comments right now. Quest Jefferson. My wife received the care that saved her life from lymphoma in the NIH hospital. That's the, a government-run hospital here. Taxpayer paid, free at the point of service. Not having to worry about bankruptcy was so liberating. I want all of you to be able to experience it well. Medicare for all is the way forward. Twitch commenters are right. They get it. They get it.
Yeah.
But the American people get it, right?
Yes.
I mean, this is cast as somehow going to hurt Democrats in a general election, that they're going to end private insurance. Really?
Yeah.
Really? People are going to not vote for Bernie Sanders because he's saying there's going to be no more premiums, no more deductibles, and no more co-pays in this country, and that we're going to save thousands of dollars? Yeah, he's honest. Yeah. We're going to pay a little bit more in taxes. But you know what? I'll happily pay more in taxes if it means that I will save thousands of dollars every single year on healthcare.
Yeah, and then undoubtedly on the mainstream television right now, they're asking the question, what about people who are attached to their insurance companies? What about all the people who are going to be so sad to lose their insurers? And I believe the question was framed that way even in the course of the debate tonight. And what you gotta respond is that nobody is attached to their insurance company. People are attached to their doctors.
I love my Blue Cross Blue Shield. How dare you?
It's a good point though, Brianna, because you often hear this, Barack Obama said that nobody would lose their insurance and wouldn't be able to go to the doctor they have. But
Yeah.
here's the fundamental difference between Medicare for All and the Affordable Care Act. You will be able to go to any doctor that you want because when there's Medicare for All, there will only be one insurance program in this country. Every doctor will accept it, and you will be freed from the constraints of your current health provider.
I mean, this is we have more comments coming in, and please keep them coming, and don't hesitate to donate as well when you're leaving this. Cynthia. Is it just me, or did it feel like the beginning portion of the debate was all about finding out who was for or who was against Bernie's policies for like a solid hour?
Yeah,
a lot of that was
Cynthia.
Medicare for All. Cynthia's got it right. And then Renee Mercedes Sita, she asked, she said, people in my life have died from the healthcare industry and the drug epidemic in this country. Sanders is the only person who I trust decisively lead efforts to address these crises alongside climate change.
Yeah, and that's a really important point, because let's talk about the freedoms that you don't have when you are stuck with your employer-based insurance policy. Every time you lose your job or have to switch jobs, that's losing your insurance company. That's being put in a position where you might lose your doctor. And the average American has 12 jobs by the time they're 60. The idea that employer-based insurance offers some kind of stability that a government-based program wouldn't is a complete fraud. It's a complete farce. Not to mention the fact that your employer has the ability to change your plan and make it less advantageous to you all the time. Something I don't have to tell you because every American has experienced it. Yeah.
So I want to switch things up a little bit here, and I actually think there's a clip, Josh, that is worth going through here. One of the things that really came up for me is over and over again throughout this, we heard about who has the guts. Bernie's got the guts to take on the fossil fuel industry. That's the clip right there.
That's what you want?
Yeah, that's the one. I heard it right away.
We'll come back.
Yeah, who's got the guts? It's Bernie Sanders. And what do we mean by that? What did he mean by that when he said that tonight? Who is going to take on the fossil fuel industry, the military-industrial complex, the health insurance companies, big pharma? These are the powers that have ruled Washington for decade upon decade. Just saying that you have a plan that will make things different, that's really great. We heard a lot of great ideas tonight. But you have to have a theory of change for how you are going to get that done. Bernie Sanders is the only one with the movement to take that on. That's what he means when he says guts.
Yeah. All right.
Let's play it. Let's play it.
Here we go.
Senator Sanders, and I'll let you generational. The issue is who has the guts to take on Wall Street, to take on the fossil fuel industry, to take on the big money interests who have unbelievable influence over the economic and political life of this country.
These issues
Yeah, I think that's really great. So, do you have anything that you want to say specifically about that clip, Bill?
I mean, I think I was kind of getting at it earlier. What so many folks were trying to get at tonight is they were trying to show how they were distinct, but no one could come close to touching Bernie. They all tried to have their own distinct policies. No one could talk like Bernie when it came to, I have what it takes to take them on.
So another thing that Bernie, I think, really led the pack on was taking the fight to Donald Trump.
Yes.
He was the only person I heard who straightforwardly called Donald Trump out as racist, who pointed to a number of
xenophobic,
exactly, crimes. What other word is there for it that Donald Trump has inflicted upon the American people? Did you want to talk about that a little bit, Bill?
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I want to get into here is, he even mentioned the polls at one point, right? Bernie mentioned the polls. 25 out of 26 polls that have Bernie Sanders and Trump matched up in the general election have Bernie Sanders winning. Not only that, but if you look at those polls, Bernie is beating Trump in states like, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, the 3 states that got Trump into the White House. Bernie beats Trump by double digits.
Right.
So, all this electability or, who can appeal to the most amount of, parts of the party. We're going to expand the electorate, and we're going to take on Donald Trump, and we're going to win because right now It looks like the polls are showing that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to really stress that double-digit point.
Yeah.
Because there's something
Hell
called,
yeah.
there is a range of error on these polls. And I think that last time around, some people got a little bit too comfortable with these polls and the fact that they weren't particularly steady. But even back to 2016, Bernie Sanders' nearly double-digit lead has been so consistent that it's lasted years. Specifically in these states where he performed very strongly in the primary last time around. And I think that when we're talking about electability, it's not about these kind of superficial identity characteristics. It's not about being white or male. Those aren't the things that make you electable or make you likely to win. It's the fact that he is strong in those states because he delivers an economic populist message and talks about the needs of the people in those states. That he talks about a living wage, that he talks about health care, that he talks about a Green New Deal and jobs programs, that he talks about unemployment, that he stands with laborers in those states who are the ones who have been worst impacted by the disastrous trade policies of presidents of yore.
Bernie Sanders is offering a vision for this country.
Yes.
Your life will fundamentally change if Bernie Sanders is elected president of the United States. Biden has said nothing will fundamentally change. Bernie Sanders has a different idea of how we go forward.
Yeah.
I think that resonates with people all across this country.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So you said economic populism. We were talking about those three states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Let's talk about something that wasn't brought up tonight, or barely was.
What's that, Bill?
Trade.
Yeah.
Now you might think, like this is some, like Washington thing. No. I spent years in Wisconsin. I saw what NAFTA did. It sucked the industrial base right out of that state. Yeah. It hollowed out entire towns and cities. The fact that these states are also dealing with the opioid epidemic and all of these tragedies that are happening there, these are deaths of despair, and these are brought on by NAFTA, TPP. We barely got to talk about that, and let's talk about the record.
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders against NAFTA, against TPP.
Right.
Joe Biden, nah.
Yeah.
It's a clear distinction. We had a moment there that we could have driven that home. And in the states that matter when it comes to defeating Donald Trump and getting back the White House, Bernie beats Trump and Bernie beats Biden because he has a better record.
Yeah, and I just want to make a really specific point here because there is an extent to which the media likes to characterize issues regarding trade, industry in the Midwest as white. They like to characterize any mention of working class voters as a conversation about white working class voters. But as those of you who listen to Hear the Burn, our campaign podcast, remember from a previous episode, 88,000 black voters in Wisconsin stayed home between 2012 and 2016. And when asked why it was that they didn't go to the polls, what they repeatedly said is that they didn't see a candidate who was offering them a substantive change in their life, a substantive improvement. And these are people who also worked in those factories and who were often the first who were laid off as a result of these disastrous trade policies. And when we're talking about voter turnout and inspiring people in these parts of the states, we have to realize that this is labor, trade, these are multiracial coalitions that we're building here. And it's important not to erase those voices and to show them that they're being seen and that they're a part of this conversation.
I think that's a great point, Brianna. We've read a lot of stories about, let's take Lordstown, Ohio, for example. Well, we see a lot of stories about Lordstown, Ohio, and we see a lot of stories about white men losing their jobs. What we don't see is that Lordstown, Ohio is a majority black town.
No one ever talks.
No one talks about that.
Yeah.
But Bernie Sanders is offering a vision for America that addresses the crisis that white people are facing in this country, that black people are facing in this country, that Latinos are facing in this country. And what he's saying is that we all have to come together to demand that change, that when all of us come together, we're more powerful than the billionaires who are trying to prop up Donald Trump.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to something right now that's a little different than what we're talking about, but the Twitch commenters are killing it. Let's keep the donations coming, which is incredible and helps build the movement. But these comments, Purple Shade, I see you. Purple Shade wants to talk about how all of these issues are connected. Right? When we talk about these issues that disproportionately affect marginalized people, it's not just their class issues, they're not just race issues, they are not separate, they are intertwined.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the intersectionality of this movement?
I mean, anybody who follows me on Twitter may or may not know that this is a little bit of a hobby horse of mine.
Oh, wow.
And that it feels to me to be not an accident that there is this persistent choice that is presented by the media that says it has to be race or class, that it's one or the other. When any person of color, any black person, any Latino, any Asian person in America understands that they don't exist in a world where their race or class independently determine their outcomes. And I think that this is an important point because there was a lot of kind of personal back and forth about race and people's personal records on race that happened tonight, but not a lot of conversation about the issues that are actually affecting people of color specifically in this country. So I want to talk about how not just healthcare, but the fact that Black Americans and Latinos are disproportionately underinsured. I think it's 1 out of every 4 Latinos is or underinsured below the age of 65. You know, when we're talking about issues that relate to these racial groups, we're also talking about a $15 minimum wage. We're talking about Bernie Sanders standing with Walmart workers. Walmart is the single largest employer of Black Americans in this country. You know, these are the kind of things that need to be intersectionally tied together. You know, we're talking about a candidate who in 2016 was the only one in the race who was calling for an end to the death penalty. We're talking about a candidate, and this didn't come out tonight. Not a lot of
the criminal justice
reform.
system's totally getting everything.
That is right.
We didn't talk about criminal
talked
justice.
about it at all.
We got into some personal issues that were involved with the Buttigieg is involved in, but we didn't talk about the broader issues that I think are actually of primary concern to the American people. You know, Bernie Sanders is the only candidate who came out and said that advocated for prisoners to have the right to vote, as they have in the state of Vermont, who doesn't see this as an issue that should be preserved only for, white prisoners in Maine and Vermont, but who is, like always, willing to say the perhaps politically unpopular thing because it's the right thing, and he's demonstrating leadership again on these kinds of issues.
Yes.
You know, when we're talking about, by the way, issues that are important to the Black community and Medicare for all, we can't forget the fact that mental health care will be covered under Medicare for all. So
in dental, in vision, in hearing.
So people, if you've ever had the experience of trying to find a new therapist and shopping around and realizing that on top of all of your stress, anxiety, depression, or whatever it is that you're dealing with, you have to contend with finding someone you like and discovering that they don't actually take your insurance. That is a crucial issue for people of color and people of all kinds and youth and people of all ages across this country.
I just want to take it back to a second to defeating Donald Trump.
Sure.
And
Hell yeah.
Because I just want to play Bernie's answer for a second because I think that he really he got asked the question, you're going to be labeled a democratic socialist. Can you beat Donald Trump? And I just want to play his answer because I think it's perfect.
Yeah.
Well, I think the responses at the last poll I saw had us 10 points ahead of Donald Trump because the American people understand that Trump is a phony, that Trump is a pathological liar and a racist, and that he lied to the American people during his campaign. He said he was going to stand up for working families. Well, President Trump, you're not standing up for working families when you try to throw 32 million people off the health care that they have, and that 83% of your tax benefits go to the top 1%. That's how we beat Trump. We expose him for the fraud that he is.
That's it. We expose him for the fraud that he is. Bernie Sanders can beat Donald Trump. Not only can he beat him, he is the best candidate in the race to beat Donald Trump.
So another area where Trump has been particularly fraudulent, an area that he built his entire campaign on ever since he came down that golden escalator, is this issue of immigration. And, basically castigating and casting a negative light on anybody brown who is south of the American border. And so we had some few interesting immigration questions tonight, and I think that once again, Bernie Sanders showed a lot of leadership in this area because he was one of the few. I think I was corrected on Twitter earlier today. Marianne Williamson also did this, but Bernie Sanders showed leadership in characterizing our immigration crisis as a global concern that has roots in foreign policy.
A hemispheric concern.
Yeah, does anyone want to pick up on that?
Well, yeah, go for it.
No, I mean, what Bernie Sanders laid out today, and I don't think any other candidate did this, is how you actually solve the root causes of the crisis that we face. And we know that there are many people crossing the border. And we need to totally change the way that we treat immigrants coming into this country. Bernie Sanders said that the first executive action that he will take is to undo all of the racist, anti-immigrant things that Donald Trump has done.
Right.
But in that first week as President of the United States, what he's also going to do is gather all of the leaders in this hemisphere to talk about how we root out gang violence in Central American countries, how we make people safer, and how we undo decades of policies that have led to the situation that we face today.
Yeah. You know, and another big point that I want to make sure that doesn't go by is Senator Sanders' unequivocal support for abortion rights. And this is something, again, that's tied up with Medicare for All. As we mentioned in the pregame show, that Medicare for All would get rid of the Hyde Amendment. And we had a very strong statement from Bernie Sanders, and I believe we have tape of that as well. And I don't want to let it go by the wayside.
Yeah.
Because all too often, and this is something that happened in 2016, his decades-long advocacy for a woman's right to choose that has at no point wavered doesn't necessarily always get credit. And I think that this is what we're talking about with that question of, you know, how much should identity matter in these kinds of races? And I think his answer was really right. You know, of course it's important. One's identity lends one's a person perspective and how they are able to see the world. But it is not a one-for-one that your identity dictates your policy. Anybody who's ever heard of Clarence Thomas knows that that's the truth, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, one of the terrible abortion laws that just came out of the South is from a state where we had a female governor signing it into law, right? So the question has to be what a person's record looks like at the end of the day. And Bernie Sanders' record and his persistence in being so unequivocal about a woman's right to choose is really something commendable that we should highlight.
Yeah.
Roll the clip.
Here we go.
About litmus test. My litmus test is I will never nominate any justice to the Supreme Court unless that justice is 100% clear he or she will defend Roe v. Wade. Third of all, I do not believe in packing the court. We got a terrible 5-4 majority conservative court right now. But I do believe that constitutionally we have the power to rotate judges to other courts. And that brings in new blood into the Supreme Court and a majority, I hope, that will understand that a woman has the right to control her own body and that corporations cannot run the
Senator,
United States of America.
I'm going to give you 10 additional seconds because the question is, what if the court has already overturned Roe and Roe is gone? All of the things you just described would be to try to preserve Roe. If Roe is gone, what could you do as president to preserve abortion rights?
Well, first of all, let me tell you this. It didn't come up here, but let's face this. Medicare for all guarantees every woman in this country the right to have an abortion if she wants it.
Thank you, Senator.
And can I just address this for a second? And I want to talk.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about Bernie Sanders' record on abortion for a second. In the early 90s, Bernie Sanders voted to codify the right to an abortion into federal law. You want to talk about what happens if Roe v. Wade is overturned by the Supreme Court? You have a president of the United States who for the last 3 decades has supported codifying the right to an abortion into law. That's how you protect a woman's right to control her own body. Second, in 1972, before Roe v. Wade, Bernie Sanders was already talking about how politicians should not have the right to control a woman's body. That is a woman's choice. And abortion is a woman's choice. And so what we need is somebody who has been consistent on this issue from the moment that he got involved in politics.
Yeah, I think that's really right. At the end of the day, you know, we asked in the pre-show why it was that Representative Khanna felt so comfortable throwing his lot in with Bernie so early.
Yeah.
And I think his answer and my own personal answer are largely the same. I don't have any doubts or questions about the kind of person Bernie Sanders will be when he's no longer under the pressure of having to conform to whatever is popular in the context of an electoral contest.
Yeah.
He has shown the mettle of who he is over the course of his 30 years in politics. And he is someone that I don't have to necessarily wait as long as perhaps other candidates to prove themselves in the course of an election contest like this.
I'm I'm on these Twitch comments right now. I love them. Catnip Nep I see you. You have been asking this over and over and over again. I think it's great. It's something that we need to get on here. What's the opinion on transgender and LGBTQ rights in general? What's Bernie's opinion on that? Well, he is someone with the longest track record. Back when it wasn't cool, we are talking about the 70s, the 80s, he was calling for full equality. He's still there. He wants to pass the Equality Act. But even going further than this, the health disparities, everything from mental health to the absolute disparity that we're seeing in the LGBTQ community on health access is directly addressed in Medicare for All. That is not a coincidence. That is one of the big points. And I also want to get on something here. The LGBTQ movement is part of our movement.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about Bernie Sanders' movement, it's not just his movement. It's bringing all of those together. It's bringing into Black Lives Matter in that movement. It's bringing in the disability rights movement. It's bringing in the women's rights movement, which we're seeing down in Alabama and all across the country. It is bringing in the LGBTQ rights movement and building all of us together in a very inclusive way to drive forward a progress that this country just simply is dying for.
Can I just add one more thing? This is the comment, and I'll read the comment in a second, spark this, but abortion can sometimes be an issue that we disagree on. There's other issues that we can have fights about. But Street Spirit said, I just want to say, I think Bernie's an all right guy. Even if you disagree with him, you have to admit he stands up for his principles, which 99.9% of Congress can't say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and to tie that in with the point that Bill was just making, when you go back to the 80s and you see the things that Bernie Sanders was saying and then read some of the comments that people wrote into the local newspaper, people who disagreed with him, it really puts into the context the bravery that it takes to stand up for what's right when it's not broadly popular. It's one thing to say you've evolved on gay marriage, you've evolved in LGBTQIA equality in 2013, 14, 15, but in the 1980s, at the height of the AIDS epidemic, to be viewing these issues as basic human rights issues. This weird charm about Bernie Sanders is that he doesn't think of it as this kind of, well, my perception anyway, is that he doesn't think of it as this kind of like, I'm checking off categories in a book. He's presented with an issue, with concerns that are faced by people, Americans, constituents, whomever, and says, well, basic equality is equality, and people should be treated like human beings. There's this almost unsentimental, a matter-of-fact way of just knowing that he's going to treat everybody equally and fairly, regardless of what the circumstances are. And also attend to the fact that there are a lot of economic issues involved here as well. So especially with the trans community, extremely high rates of homelessness. It's not just, there are a lot of wonderful shows that are celebrating the trans community today and the more glamorous sides of it. But it's also important to understand at the end of the day, teen homelessness and a lot of economic issues are very central to trans Americans today.
Josh, how's the donations coming?
We're doing well. Dave just gave us $27.
Dave!
Thank you. Terry, also another $27.
Terry.
If you can donate, live.berniesanders.com. Make a donation today. We need your help. Thank you.
Okay, so earlier before the debate, we were talking about the fact that climate change didn't come up very much yesterday. How do we feel about how much airtime it got this evening?
I don't think it's ever enough. I don't think it's ever going to be enough until we actually do something to confront this massive issue, and we don't have any time left.
Yeah.
I was going to say we don't have much time left. It's done. We need movement now.
Yeah, I think an interesting point is that we talk about having these 12 years left, but the reality is that it's 12 years to prevent like a complete and total disaster. We already kind of have one foot in it. It's like a triage situation. It's like we have crossed a Rubicon of sorts already, and now we're just trying to prevent the floodwaters from going completely over our heads, literally and metaphorically.
Can we play Bernie Sanders' clip for a second on climate change? Because
Let's do it.
I think it's really special.
The scientists tell us we have 12 years before there is irreparable damage to this planet. This is a global issue. What the President of the United States should do is not deny the reality of climate change, but tell the rest of the world that instead of spending $1.5 trillion on weapons of destruction, let us get together for the common enemy, and that is to transform the world's energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustanciable energy. The future of the planet rests on us doing this.
Before we go, hang on.
Before we leave this topic.
Here's the solution. Pass the torch.
Pass the torch to the generation that's going to feel the effects of
Take
climate
on
change.
the fossil
Pass the
fuel
torch to the
industry is the
generation that's
solution.
inventive
Agree.
enough.
Thank you.
Before we leave this topic,
You heard it right there.
Yeah.
The key to this is taking on the fossil fuel industry. Bernie Sanders will take on the fossil fuel industry. No other candidate is going to do that. He's going to call them out, he's going to identify them, and he is going to take them on. That's the difference. Now, in 2015, Bernie Sanders said that the greatest national security threat is climate change. He
Yes.
was laughed at the time, but now you see a number of candidates agreeing with him that
Yeah.
climate change is the greatest national security threat. I think that it's no question about it.
Yeah.
Now, there's also a difference on foreign policy in this debate
Yeah.
and in this election. And Bernie Sanders represents one side of this, and Joe Biden represents the other. And what we saw tonight was Bernie willing to challenge Joe Biden on his decision to vote for the Iraq War and send us into the worst foreign policy decision that we have made in the modern history of this country. Maybe Vietnam is the only other example.
Yeah, quite a race
Which,
you're going with it. Yeah.
let's remember,
Don't buy boys, they're all bad.
yeah.
but that's the difference in this election. And foreign policy is obviously such a huge issue for the
Yeah.
President of the United States, and we need somebody who has the judgment to make those decisions. And Bernie Sanders, I think, perfectly crystallized the difference between himself and Joe Biden on this issue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's right. So were there any final points that you guys wanted to raise before we close out this evening?
Yeah, Twitch streamer Bud TP said we said PUBG, not LGBT. That's trash. PUBG's engine is garbage. Fortnite is where it's at, and also the LGBTQ rights movement. So take that, Bud TP. I don't want none of that noise up in here.
I understood none of those acronyms.
Yeah, well, you know, for the
I have no idea what you just said.
Yeah, PUBG's trash.
Okay. Were there any other comments or any other points you wanted to hit before we closed up today? Let us know. And again, don't forget about the donation button. This is a movement that is 100% powered by you, and that's why you see us able to talk about these issues and concentrate on the issues that are most important to the American people.
I want to take us out on Bernie Sanders, the way he closed
Yeah.
the debate tonight.
Yeah.
I thought it was really powerful, and he talked about some of the themes that we've hit on tonight. So let me just say this. Thank you all for watching. This has obviously been one of the biggest nights of the entire campaign so far. We finally had our first debate. We're going to have many, many more over the course of this. But what you saw tonight was one candidate who has a vision for America, who is going to make healthcare a right, who is going to fight for environmental justice, for racial justice, for economic justice, for social justice, and understands how to get it done. He has a movement behind him. He's a part of that movement, and he can defeat Donald Trump in 2020. So with that, I'm going to let Bernie Sanders close us out. Thank you all so much for watching. It's been great to have a conversation with you
Smash
all.
that donation button.
Please do. Thanks again. Here's Bernie Sanders to close it out.
I suspect people all over the country who are watching this debate are saying, these are good people, they have great ideas. But how come nothing really changes? How come for the last 45 years wages have been stagnant for the middle class? How come we have the highest rate of childhood poverty? How come 45 million people still have student debt? How come 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of America? And here is the answer. Nothing will change unless we have the guts to take on Wall Street, the insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the military-industrial complex, and the fossil fuel industry. If we don't have the guts to take them on, we'll continue to have plans, we'll continue to have talk, and the rich will get richer, and everybody else will be struggling.
Thank you, Senator.